Earthly Matters. You're watching Q&A. It's live, it's interactive. Our next question comes from Caitlin Diggins.
This question is for Glenn. At the Sydney Writers' Festival, you indicated that you would like to see Julian Assange in jail and said, it's not up for vigilantes to reveal government secrets. And you recently published a tell-all book, The Interrogator, heavily censored by the CIA for revealing highly classified information. How do you compare yourself to Assange, who also revealed government secrets without the lucrative book deal?
Glenn.
Well, who has a lucrative book deal?
If it weren't for the CIA censoring half of it, you probably would.
It's not. I was told if I had written the book 5 years before the publishing industry collapsed, I might have earned something, but that's not the case. There's a distinction that I understand is easily not perceived between what Assange did and my book, say, or a true whistleblower. Assange is basically a vigilante, and all of Western governments have, in jurisprudence, have worked out that one may not take the law into one's own hands. And that's why you have a state, which is the only entity recognized to have the authority to exercise force, to apply the laws, and compel compliance with the regulations that are established by society through whatever political or legal system there is. So Assange basically was a vigilante. What I did, or what a whistleblower does, I'm not sure I was a whistleblower. I was not on my own deciding to reveal the processes of government. In my specific case, I was very careful to follow all of the obligations I have legally to conform to the clearance process so that I would not be found to reveal sources and methods as the constituted authorities decided was the case. I tried to speak out about policies and practices that I think were egregiously wrong and actually illegal,
this is, of course, exactly what Julian Assange says. And I've got to ask you this.
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
do you
I
think
don't agree. I don't agree.
do you think the editors of the New York Times and the Guardian, Der Spiegel, the other newspapers which published the information that Wikileaks brought to the public, do you think they should be locked away as well?
No. Well, that's a distinction to make. You have to have a free press, and you have to have.
He calls himself Assange, calls himself a journalist.
He's a publisher.
He's not a publisher. He's someone who was given from someone who clearly broke the law the entire range of the United States government's foreign policy deliberations. Confidentiality is a legitimate need for, one, a diplomatic corps, but institutions and families and government entities themselves. The New York Times or the Australian that receives some information will and they do go through a deliberative process. Is this in the public interest? Is this necessary for us to do or useful for us to do given our, in American terms, First Amendment rights for free speech and free expression? Or since the government may approach us and say, you will endanger national security and lives, do we decide on our own not to publish? And that happens all the time. There's a dialogue that way all the time.
I'm just going to bring, just sticking to Assange, I want to bring in some of the other panellists. Masha Gesson, I mean, do you think Assange is a hero or a villain? As a fellow journalist?
I'm not sure, but I certainly don't see that there is a very clear distinction between him and the New York Times. And I'm sure he also deliberated, and I'm sure he could make a good argument for thinking that publishing all of what he got was in the public interest and that he was in no position to choose between the different documents that he got. I think it can be a well-argued position.
Jeffrey, do you have any thoughts on this, Julian Assange, as a fellow American? You've just heard the position of Glenn Carl. Have you considered the position of Assange at all?
No, the problem with being a novelist is I always agree with the last person that spoke. I thought he was making some very good points. I was agreeing with him, and then she was really very persuasive.
But then you go away.
I could write about 2 characters now, and I'd have a book. I'm not sure I could figure it out.
All right, okay. Let's go to a journalist or let's say, ask Greg whether you consider Assange operates in the world of journalism, because his defence, in fact, against conspiracy to do espionage will be that he's a journalist and therefore entitled to the same protections as other journalists in America.
Well, Tony, certainly in my career I've published my share of secret government documents, and everyone who's given me such a document, I guess, is guilty of an offence. And there has to be a kind of grey area where journalists are not guilty of an offence, and you have to say to the government, well, protect your own damn documents. And I think the guilty party in this is the US government, which didn't protect its own damn documents. I am in favour of disclosure. My one criticism of Assange is this, but it's a very serious one. I don't agree with a lot of his views, but that doesn't matter. That's great. I wish he'd sent me the documents. I'd have certainly published lots of them. But I have one serious criticism of him. When his deal with the papers started to go wrong, he started to publish documents without blacking out the names of innocent people. I don't think that's right. I was a correspondent in 1985 in Beijing in China, and I got great stories from people who weren't in a position to judge how they would be hurt by me publishing their stories. And I thought I had a responsibility to suppress their identity. Now, when Assange stopped suppressing the identity of innocent people, I think that's going a step too far. I don't mind that he upset the government, and I don't think he did much.
So you don't think he should be charged with espionage in America, which is essentially what...
I'd be...
Where we're headed.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that at all. And I think the real villain in all this is the US government, which should have better security for its documents. After all, if Julian Assange can get them, probably the Chinese government can get them.
Yeah.
Let's. I want to hear from that husband of yours who keeps prodding you in the back late at night. He also spent a good deal of time trying to keep Julian Assange out of prison.
He did. I mean, I think Julian is the most courageous person. And why shouldn't we know how our governments are spending our money and what they're spending it on? It was liberating to read all of that information he published. But I will say one thing: he's a terrible house guest, because he was living in our house for a while. He was in our attic. Because Jeff's a human rights lawyer, we've had so many interesting people in our attic. I've had Salman Rushdie, I've had Assange, I even had James Hewitt. Remember the man who had the affair with Princess Diana? Basically, I've had everyone in my attic
so a
except...
lot of hands are in your house.
I've had everyone in my attic except Anne Frank, really. And I can just say that he was a very bad house guest.
So well, to be honest with you. So, well, I'm going to have to ask you, why was he a bad house guest? Because everyone will be asking that question.
He's not house trained. I did my best, girls. I did my best. But the only other argument I ever really had with him was he doesn't read female fiction. But a lot of men don't read books by women. So when he was in Wandsworth prison on remand, which was terrible, he shouldn't have been on remand, but that was my one chance to send him in a huge bunch of books only by women, from Jane Austen to today. Not Jackie Collins. But I thought, as I had a captive audience, you know.
But also, I've got to ask this, first thing in the morning, when you're sitting down at breakfast and across the table is Julian Assange staring into his cup of coffee, what does he talk about?
Well, he's glued to his laptop the whole time, and he's a computer genius, but he couldn't fix my laptop, I hasten to add. But he's, look, he was very worried at the time about being bumped off. He was very worried about... He was very worried.
Well, he's paranoid then. I
mean, that's ridiculous. I think he's...
He did have a number of senior American politicians saying he should be assassinated.
He should be faced the death penalty.
Well, they're fools too, and that's outrageous behaviour. There's a distinction to make that has been lost, though. There seems to be the conviction that Assange is the equivalent of Daniel Ellsberg, and he's not at all. They were doing very different things. Daniel Ellsberg was telling the American public by leaking documents.
But you know who says that? Daniel Ellsberg.
Well, I'm making a distinction. That he was protesting the perversion, because it was the willful distortion of assessments by the CIA that said, everything's going wrong, we can't win this. And then, as it arrived at the president's desk, it was saying the light at the end of the tunnel is getting bigger and bigger, we're almost successful. And he thought that it was outrageous that in the end 60,000 Americans would die and 1 million Vietnamese because of the distortion willfully of intelligence. That's a different step to address, or issue to address, than Assange simply saying, I, Julian Assange, on my own decide what the American government should and should not share.
And the New York Times and the Guardian and all the other newspapers that publish it. We're going to move on. We're talking about Julian Assange as a house guest. Now we're going to move on to torture.